Hey everyone, you're watching Conversations in Pop Culture, and I am your host, Andrew Davis. And I do want to quickly say this. If you like something, whether that is my show or my guests' comics or even Disney, you need to actually financially support that and put your money where your mouth is and go out and support those things because they do not get made without your support. So I personally don't care what you support, but you should support what you like. Having said that, though, I do not want to bore everybody with my sponsors. They are down in the description below of some cool stuff. So go check that out if you would like to support me in this show. But without further ado, I have with me comic creators Tim Radecki and Mike Dean, who I'm meeting for the first time. So welcome back, Tim, and obviously Mike, welcome to the show.
Hey, Andrew, thanks for having us back. That's great. Good seeing you again.
Good to be here.
Yeah, no, I'm excited because I like your comic. I think your comic is funny, and it's a lot of stuff, and it is super bud, and it is a fun book about marijuana, weed, superheroes, all sorts of fun stuff. You have, I believe, 3 issues out so far. And so what is the basic premise for those who are hearing about this book for the first time, coming across it, checking it out, and all that fun stuff for people who have no idea what this book is about?
Yeah, so it's about a strain of marijuana that gives people superpowers. So it starts getting passed around in this small town, and everybody that smokes it or inhales it or comes across it in some kind of way just starts developing different superpowers. Our main character is Danny. He's kind of like your lovable slacker stoner. And his dream is to be a superhero. So when he gets superpowers, that's naturally his instinct is to become a superhero. So he's trying to fight crime while everybody else in the town are starting to use it for their own personal gain. So a lot of them are trying to look for financial gain or respect or anything they can get from it.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting because obviously a lot is going on with this book, and it really touches upon a lot of different things. And so, where did even the premise of this come from? Because obviously, superheroes have been done before. That's not new, and also people being exposed to things. But to add the weed element and the marijuana element to it, where did that idea come from? Because it is a fun idea. Obviously, it's become less stigmatized in our society in the last, I think, 10 years. I think is a fair assessment. So where did all this even come from? Before we really get into the story and sort of catch everybody up, and hopefully they'll go enjoy it as much as they would enjoy something else. Hint, hint.
Yeah.
Well, Tim and I mean, obviously Tim and I were always big comic book fans and superhero fans, and we were like taking in a lot of that material at the time that we came up with it. And I think I was speculating something with just like, oh, like let's say, this medical marijuana thing actually catches on and becomes like as profitable as it now is. What would happen if like big pharma got involved and they started, maybe trying to make very specific strains to do specific things like treat illnesses like Parkinson's or cancer, and like what would some of those side effects maybe be and what could maybe come of that. And once I started talking about it more with Tim, it just like all these ideas came out of it, and there's just like endless possibilities for where it can go. And obviously we saw it as like a superhero or more comic book based type of story, and we kind of found a few different like parallels that we really liked for it. One was obviously like X-Men, and then also, we'd both been fans of the NBC show Heroes when that was coming out, and we kind of liked how all those characters in that show are primarily gray. No one is like black or white hero villain for the most part, and we liked that as kind of like that's a little more true to life, that not every character is going to just be like, oh, I have powers, I'm a superhero now, this is my new job.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting how that even came about. And obviously, I read your book and I took more of a liking to it of the Fantastic Four to some degree, where they get exposed to something and those powers occur. And obviously, that weed strain is coming in. And so, what is this like? Because much like the Fantastic Four, I feel like these people in this town didn't choose this power. It was an accident. They really weren't supposed to get it. And obviously, some people are using this stuff and getting it for their own use. And then other people are using it to treat their stuff. And so, what was this like really creating this? Because while your main focus is Danny, and Danny is a really interesting character, there are other consequences that ensue. So what was this like? Because I feel like there's really the town story going on, there's Danny's story going on, and then there's some other stuff going on. So what was that like really creating Danny? Because he's front and center, I feel.
Yeah,
First and
that's a really great point too, to bring up the Fantastic Four. I never really thought about that, but you're right. The way that they get exposed to it, and they don't plan for that, and each one of their bodies react to it differently, and they develop different powers, much like our characters. And similarly, I think Fantastic Four was one of the first books to really focus on those characters as people versus just the heroes. Where, like, if you think about the original Stan Lee comic versus what was going on at DC at the time, DCs were very much just Superman was Superman, Batman was Batman, Wonder Woman was Wonder Woman. But with the Fantastic Four, we got to see what like Johnny Storm was like day to day, and he's dealing with like school issues, and Reed and Sue are having like their marital things going on, and Ben's always like stuck in this clay form that's really like a hindrance to his personal life, and his temper that flares up with Johnny. So you got more of their characters coming through, and that's something that I think we also tried to pull on with Superbud. And then back to Danny, I think for us it was like, okay, let's start out with a character who would want to be a superhero, and that was kind of the impetus for that idea. Was Danny is a guy who loves comic books. He grows up reading them. He watches all the superhero cartoons and the movies. So naturally for him, in his sort of like stinted adolescent phase, he wants to be a superhero. Where everybody else in the town, it's a more serious issue for them. Kind of like you were hinting at, somebody who did not want this. It's a serious issue for them. So there's something we get to play with that. Each issue we try to introduce one new character to the storyline and how they are affected by the superpowers. So by issue 5, we'll have 5 main characters that are all getting different superpowers, or groups of them. And we'll also focus on 2 other characters, Tyrone and Chill. They're kind of like the counter to Danny. So we introduce them in issue 1. They're sort of like gang members. They're low in the totem pole in their gang. And the story kind of becomes, the B story anyway, becomes their rise to power once they get the superpower from Superbud.
Yeah, and let's even go further into this, because this is what gets so interesting, because Danny is 20 years old. And I'm going to say something, and hopefully no 20-year-olds are going to be angry at me for saying it. But I think 20-year-olds are not really all that mature on any gender.
He isn't, yeah.
On that
That's a hot take.
I know, it's so controversial. It's so controversial. We don't shy away from controversial issues on this show. And obviously he dropped out in college. I don't think Danny is not smart. I just don't think he has wisdom. Is a good way to put it. But now he has these powers, and other people also have powers. So what is that like? Because taking away, obviously, how he gets his powers, there is that idea that he's inheriting responsibility, but he doesn't have wisdom, and he has to figure it out. But he also is somewhat impulsive, I feel, a little bit, and he doesn't exactly make the best decisions constantly. And so what is this like? Because it's a lot of fun, because you get that learning curve of a hero, but you also get the mess ups of a hero as well. And that's something that I feel like we don't get to see the vulnerabilities of superheroes anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when we think of Danny in terms of like what maybe makes him work as a hero, it's definitely not his brain or his strategy or his wisdom, but he has heart, like his desire to help people is like the most genuine aspect of why he wants to be a hero. And you're right, like he flunks out of school not because he's like unintelligent, but he's just not really stimulated by going to the community college or like taking classes and not really having like anything that he wants to do with his life. So of course when he sees this calling, it's the only thing that really makes sense to him.
And I think for us too, it was also from like a writer's perspective, let's start him at a low point so that way we can watch him grow as a character too. So while it's about weed and it is a funny comic, I don't want to detract from that for the audience. Like if you're interested, it's definitely got a lot of jokes in it and it's a funny comic. But we're serious writers. We do like to take the storytelling seriously. So we're building that up so that way we can kind of watch him grow to long form, the fully realized version of Danny that he wants to become.
So let's even talk about that too, because obviously I feel superhero books go one of two ways now. I feel like they either go to the point where the hero is already established and now they're facing odds that are against them, or they're having an identity crisis. I feel is sort of how it is. I mean, look at DC. When Batman got rebooted, Batman was already established. It was now that he's facing, bigger and bigger odds. And then there's the other side of the superhero spectrum where the character just gets their powers and you get to watch them grow. And they are either in high school and they get their powers, or they're somehow, adolescents, or they're bestowed upon them and then they get that learning curve. And so both of them have advantages, by the way. I mean, there's no question if you're writing, there's not one right answer. But what is this like for you to really be able to develop him and get that impetus of power, understand his powers, tell that story, and not have to go back and do an origin issue per se, as well as also get to build the world. And it's not just him getting his powers and nobody else has it. Everybody else is getting the powers relatively close to him, if either before or after, or two puffs after, technically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, similar to what you were saying before about the story being about the town, that was something that Tim and I discussed a lot when we were talking about, what should Danny's powers be, and like how broad are they going to be? And we felt like the flying was a way of giving him something that is, a substantial power. It's something everybody would ever dream of having, but we're not making him Superman. He's not invincible. He's not indestructible. He still has so many limitations, and it encourages him to work with the other characters around him who are sometimes smarter than him, sometimes, more practical than him, but, they get to work more as a team in that way. And, same with when you have the little brother Mikey, who gets these powers of like immense strength, but he's still a little kid and he can't really know how to use those the way an adult would.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of humor that we can add to the story or approach the story with, taking something that is so common as like a hero origin story in a lot of ways. A lot of people have read that before, so we can play with those tropes, to add a twist to it, or just add something unique, like Mikey being, a 9 or 10-year-old kid getting superpowers, and what's that like with a little kid having superpowers, or what's it like with a stoner having superpowers? Where, like Mike said earlier, yes, he is ideal and he is a good person. He's got a good heart, but like you were hinting at, Andrew, he's not the brightest person. So even if your heart's in the right place, sometimes you're going to make those bad decisions, which can be a great thing for storytelling and also be really funny. We hope to add a lot of that kind of stuff into the next couple issues here.
Yeah. Let's even talk a little bit about the humor element of it too, because I'll be very honest. I enjoy serious shows. I think everybody enjoys a good drama and taking it up, and then they just keep taking it up. But there gets to a point also where I view comics as an escape, and I like to laugh. Like, I'm a big anime guy, and I love funny animes because they make me relax, laugh, and forget about my problems for a little bit. And I think that's something that is a nice touch. And it's also nice when you get a superhero book that doesn't take itself too seriously. And I think it's something that's different, I feel. And so what is that like for you guys to fill that in? And obviously you're hitting a very specific niche. I mean, or specific plant here. I'm sorry. This is just low hanging fruit.
Yeah, yeah.
Low hanging fruit.
Yeah,
It's good. Nip it in the bud now.
yeah.
as I speak. But anyway, all jokes aside, what is that like? Because I feel that more people are now starting to branch out and have to make a superhero book a little bit different. Because
Definitely.
let's be realistic. DC and Marvel own the superhero market. And in these superhero books, sometimes they hit, sometimes they miss. But if you add comedy and then you go down into that niche elements of it, you start building and cultivating an audience. What is that?
I think you're absolutely right too. Like, just like from a fan of indie comics, like I typically avoid your basic superhero story, because if I wanted that, I could get the best writers and the best artists doing that at Marvel and DC. So if there's something with superpowers or superheroes, I want to see what you can do with it that's different. So like Black Hammer is a really interesting, unique story. So what element can you add to it that's something unique or something different than what we can get at Marvel or DC? So that's what I'm looking for in like an indie comic. that does superheroes. So for us, that was comedy. It was kind of like a natural fit for us. We were coming off of writing a lot of scripts for sitcoms. We were pitching, and we had just done a web series. So we were really into that comedy like frame of mind, and it just made sense for us to combine that with the superhero stuff that we always were dying to write, but budget restraints. It never really made sense for us to do that as an indie filmmaker or even in like low budget TV. Everything we were writing was always low budget, so we really just didn't have the means to make a giant superhero story like this. So with comics, like, yes, while you have to pay for your artist and that is expensive, once you pay for that artist, they can do anything. So you don't have to pay for 100 people on your crew or all these special effects, thousands and thousands of special effect shots, all that.
It's way cheaper. I'm not saying comics are I'll give an example. So I might have said this the last time. Avatar: The Last Airbender, the animated show, is way more expensive than a 144-page graphic novel. 144-page graphic novel at the top rate is $30,000 or less. An episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender has to be at least $30,000.
Probably that or more.
Way more technically. It's probably more like 50,000 to really think about it. But the idea is that we're talking about a whole story versus an episode.
Yeah, 22 minutes.
But sorry for interrupting. Continue.
No, you're absolutely right. So that was kind of our thought process on it. So going to comics was like the most ideal situation for us. We could do all those superhero kind of stories that we were dying to tell, and then combine it with the humor that was our background, that was natural for us. But what's interesting is there's not a lot of humor comics anymore. It was definitely like one of the top genres back in the day, but not a whole lot of like indie comics are humor. So we are in a little bit of a niche, which is great because you can separate you, but then there's also not a lot to compare it to, or people are going, I don't know about that. Like, do I really want to take a risk on that? And luckily people have received it really well. Like one of the biggest compliments we get all the time is like, oh, it's actually funny, or it's funnier than I thought it would be. I'm like, okay, great. So that does mean that they didn't think it was going to be funny to begin with, but it's funnier than they thought. So I'll take that.
I actually think that what you said before, Tim, about it being natural to us was the biggest thing, because we never had to like come up with jokes or come up with something funny. We were writing the scripts based on the story, and the jokes just would land as we were writing it, and we'd send drafts back and forth to each other and like respond, be like, oh, I love this joke that you put in, or I love this one. But it was never like, oh, we need a punch up here, we need something to get the audience. Those just flowed. We actually have to cut more jokes than we get to put in.
Oh, what a problem you have. What a problem you have.
Yeah.
But you mentioned something very interesting about humor comics, where obviously I had, some of my friends on, and they write a semi-humor comic before you came on. But I do realize that there is a lack of that, I think, in the market. And so why do you think that people aren't writing humor? Or do you just think that it doesn't sell? Or do you think that people are just not in the mood to write a humor, jokey type book right now because, well, they just don't want to write one? Or is it monetary? Is it funding? Or what do you guys think? Because obviously this, in my opinion, is a superhero funny book. I don't view this book as a drama. No offense. I mean,
no, none taken.
If you view it as a drama, I'll say it's a drama, but I view it as a comedy.
No, we definitely, we definitely recognize that comedy is part of the genre, and it actually is some ways like a hindrance, because whenever you're like mixing genres, I think people get a little bit like, oh, well, which one is it more of? Because that's maybe going to make the difference for them. And I think ours definitely is more a comedy. We've had that discussion of like, hey, what comes first here in the storytelling? Are we trying to like break people's hearts or change people's minds, or are we trying to tell an entertaining, funny story? And we've always come back to like, we want to tell an entertaining, funny story. But it's hard to really comment on like why other people do it. I'm sure part of it is just that it's harder to pitch.
Yeah, I think the market will dictate that. So right now, there's not a whole lot of that out there. So people aren't interested in doing it because they're not seeing it. I think once something catches on, there is a little bit of a trend that slowly builds, and then Usually it's like a bubble, it'll burst, and then you've hit a peak of too many of that one subgenre of comics, and then it'll kind of swing the other way. But yeah, I feel like not just recently, but for a while, there really hasn't been like a big comedy comic, with a few exceptions. I think like Chip Zdarsky writes really funny stuff, but he's not like nowadays. He's writing Daredevil. He's not even writing comedy books. But
We're writing Daredevil now. He's writing Batman.
Oh yeah, he switched over to Batman. So
you just asked Scott Snyder how much his page rate on Twitter should be for Batman, because Scott was doing a thing on his Substack about it. I don't know if anybody
saw that. I just replied. Yeah, no, I just replied to it actually, and I asked him. I didn't see if he saw it, but I asked him if he was going to start now in the industry, what would he do differently? Because I feel like from when he was getting started, things are so different now.
Yeah. How much the world's changed in 15, 20 years.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that a little bit later, because that's a real, I mean, things are different 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Get about 15, 20 years ago, 3 years ago.
Pre-pandemic versus now, right?
I mean, it's insane. This show wouldn't exist 3 years ago. But we're going to talk about that, I promise, because it's an interesting topic. But even going further into this and getting out of Danny, I mean, the whole town is a character where you got a bunch of people taking this strain and basically this drug that's altering them. And well, the saying is that, and then it's a saying with money, that when you come into money, it makes you more of what you already were. It's very rare that money changes somebody's behavior. As far as if you're a good person and you come into $10 million, you're probably going to be a good person. Still, you're probably going to be more of it. If you're a horrible person and you come into 10 million, you're probably going to be more of a horrible person. It's very rare that money is the changing factor. And so a lot of this, weed, when these people inherit it, it makes them more of what they are, but also it presents a unique problem too, because you have kids taking this and they don't know who they are yet. And so what is that like? I don't know if you got into that point yet, or even if you're going to explore that, but that's a really interesting question, because, and also when people don't want something, how do you deal with that too? And I know I'm throwing a few questions at you because I think it's so interesting.
No, I think that's a great point. I mean, I think like what's really special to look at in terms of that is you have, as you mentioned, Mikey, who's a young kid, but you also have Walter, who's an old man, and they're at different ends of their life spectrum, both experiencing marijuana and these powers for the first time in their lives. And I think for Walter, it's sort of like, it is like a life-changing thing compared to how he did identify with himself for so long. Just in the sense of like the way it makes him now interact differently with his hospice nurse. Whereas Mikey, we both have older brothers, and we both, I think, drew a lot on like how important we want the relationship between Mikey and his older brother Rob to be through the story, and how in some ways like this whole event brings them closer together and becomes like a bonding experience.
Yeah, no, because I mean, anytime you have somebody who is underage of 21, because I don't think, if you're 21 or under, you're not fully developed. I think the science suggests, and I'm not a scientist, but I think it's a pretty fair statement, blanket wise. There are exceptions, but anytime that somebody gets a superpower and they're 10 or 12 years old, I mean, it raises a lot of interesting questions, and all sorts of cool stuff can happen. And then it's the idea that, can they modulate it? And it just opens up so much stuff that's potentially, and I don't know how far you're going to go down it, but I just think it's an absolutely fascinating story point, and that alone could be a whole comic, just in of itself, let alone everything else that's going on. And even the fact that I don't think the story is about, his younger brother per se, Danny's younger brother, but it also is in the background. And then as Danny's coming into these powers and learning about his powers, and all sorts of crazy stuff can happen.
Yeah, it's so much fun to play with that kind of stuff. And we've built this world where there's so many characters that we can highlight one as like the A story in this unique issue. And then the next issue, we can focus on another character and we can grow them that way. And I think, Danny, and then how he relates to Mikey, the little brother, of his best friend Rob versus how Rob and Mike relate to each other because they've got that brother, older brother, younger brother relationship versus just a friend. And Danny sees the powers as awesome, but Rob is always like so nervous because he doesn't want his little brother to be hurt, even though he's this big giant monster. He doesn't want him to get hurt in this situation, so he's still playing the role of the older brother, even though physically featured wise he's much smaller now. And that presents an interesting dynamic to play with. And how do you stop a younger brother who is now like 9 feet tall?
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, and there's just so many ways it could be played out in so many ways, and I absolutely love the entire idea of where it can even go, and what can be done, what can't be done, and then obviously you have people who have taken this and they're bad people, and they're doing some bad stuff, and then you have people who were good or indifferent, and now they're doing stuff as well that may or may not be good or bad, and so you get a lot of stuff that's playable, I feel, on this field. But again, I don't want to ruin too much of this because you kind of have to do it. And it's also in its infancy where you guys have only done 3 issues so far. I think you're pushing out issue 4, working on it. And
Yeah.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that I think the ball's really going to start rolling in issues 6 and 7 and 8 because I feel like we're in the honeymoon period with your book. Nothing against your book, but like, we're getting introduced to the characters, and then all of a sudden, once we get introduced to the characters and the team or the collaborators or the heroes, I don't know what we call them exactly, but then there might be another threat. There might be big pharma who wants a piece of this now, and who knows? Maybe there's something weird about this stuff, and maybe they need more of it. A lot of fun stuff can be done. There could also be strings that depower people. I'm just throwing you ideas.
Yeah, you keep going. Yeah, so issue 4 is in the works right now. That's going to be another issue that's got a lot of action in it. So it's going to build off of what we got in 3. 3 is really just kind of setting the pieces up, and then 4 there's a lot of action, and then 5 is going to be even more action. That's going to be the culmination of this first like mini arc. So like the big culmination of that story is going to happen with issue 5. So we're really excited about that. So we got 2 more issues for this volume anyway. And our artist Tim Laddie will be starting on that in another month or 2, and then hopefully a couple months after that we'll be able to get some art to show everybody.
Yeah, man, I'm not going to push any further because I don't want to ruin anything for anybody, but I do want to actually back out of the actual story and talk about the other side of this, which is the business side. Because I think
Yeah.
that's also just as fascinating.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a secret that comics do cost money to produce. There's a lot of stuff that gets done in it. There's a lot of different philosophies and on how to do it, where some people maybe get 6 pages done and then go to Kickstarter and they run their Kickstarter and then they say their book's going to be out in 4 months. And so now when they get the money coming in, they promise their artist and they have a little bit, or they're halfway done with the book, and then they use some of the money from Kickstarter to fund the rest of the book. And so what is your philosophy when building out a book and then coming to Kickstarter or crowdfunding platforms, or even not using crowdfunding platforms? Because it's getting tricky, I feel, in this space now on how to get your book out there.
Yeah. Well, first I would say that it's ever evolving. So, whatever we say now, it might not be what we're doing in 6 months. But and we've done both, I should say too. We kickstarted issue 2. We self-funded issue 1. It took us about a year to do. We were paying 5 pages at a time. It took us forever to do it that way. And then we're like, okay, let's find another option for us. And that was, I don't want to say the impetus of Kickstarter or the early days of Kickstarter, but it was certainly new to us. There wasn't a whole lot out there. And our artist, Tim Laddie, had just done a Kickstarter on his own project, Night Stars. So we were able to kind of glean some feedback from him and like learn a little bit about the process from him. We did a Kickstarter for issue 2, much like you were talking about. We did the issue 2 Kickstarter with the art, showing everybody the art that we had for issue 1 to say this is what we can produce. And then we took, I don't know, 9 months to produce that issue 2 before we were able to get it printed and out to everybody. So that was a lengthy process. And because of the financial situation of it, we were unsure of what to do. So we took a little bit of time off. We kind of were out pitching the comic to different publishers. We were doing it at like indies, Comic-Cons. We're selling it that way. And we finally said, okay, we're ready to go back in. We reworked issues 3, 4, and 5 at the time. We started doing art on issue 3. We did the Kickstarter, and at that point, we had already had the whole Kickstarter complete. Mike and I had gotten the art back. We do our own lettering, so we were lettering it back and forth. This was like right around COVID. And then we decided, okay, like this isn't the best time. The world's falling apart right now. There's a lot of job insecurity. Let's hold off until things get on solid ground before we do the Kickstarter for issue 3. So when we launched the issue 3 Kickstarter, we had already had all the art all together. All we had to do was just finish up some lettering and then some graphics on like the variant covers and that kind of thing, and then just doing like your pre-press.
Yeah, no, because it's a big debate right now, and it's complicated because obviously the best case scenario is that you pretty much self fund and you fund it yourself, and then maybe recoup the money, or you use that money that you raise on the Kickstarter for printing, and then for the next round, and
Yeah,
then you do almost like a seed round, and a pre-seed round, investment round type thing. And I don't come from the investment world, but I understand that sector. Um, because I know some people do it that way, and I know some people do it other ways. But I'm super curious because it is a big debate right now, and obviously, I've been burned on Kickstarters. I
yeah,
mean, it's
me
rough,
too.
and I've been burned on about 4 or 5 this year alone.
Okay,
Oh
so
wow.
that's why we've changed our tactics. And for me, like I really only want to back it if I know that you've got your art done or near done. You know, if you're at the 75%, 80% done, okay, that's a last little leg to get over. But I don't like backing projects that aren't ready to go to print or near ready to print, especially if they don't have interior art. That's something I'm always looking for too, because I think it's easy to get a flashy cover and make something that looks really great, but if you don't have the interior art to back it up, I'm not really interested in your book. And I think for us too, like there's so many snags and things you hit along the way that slow down the process. I don't want to be in a position where we're owing somebody a book that isn't even ready yet, or that we don't have pages back yet, and you know your artist gets sick or something happens, they blow up and end up on a really big book, and they're not going to be able to complete that. It's hard when it's in somebody else's hands. And if you're the artist, then maybe you can take that risk. But for us, like we're hiring an artist. Mike and I are the co-creators and the writers, and we hire somebody. So I don't want to put that much pressure on them. I'd like to have their work complete and in my hands, and then we can go to Kickstarter.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's tricky. It's tricky, and then even going further into this, I mean, one of the things that's also interesting about your book in particular is that obviously you are playing in a very niche realm, which is weed, marijuana, and it's tricky. It's a tricky sector to be in because some people are for it, and some people don't have a problem with it, and some I would imagine comic shops and some creators and some other people say, cool, this is a cool book. I get it. It's just a book about this. And then other people are against it and are turned off. And so, what is that like for you to know that you're playing in that space as well? Because I don't know if Kickstarter had a problem with the book. I don't think they did because I think they're pretty open about that stuff. But at the same time, there's, obviously, I guess, a negative view on it that is resistance to some degree. So what is that like for you? Because there's going to be people who are just naturally turned off.
We've never had issues with Kickstarter. In fact, our first run, we were a staff pick by them by, I don't know, like 5 days into the campaign. We have definitely run into it though, where we go to talk to a publisher, and before we can even finish the elevator pitch, they're like, "I'm sorry, this just isn't going to vibe with us because part of our line markets to kids, and we wouldn't feel comfortable having this as part of
It's
our
not your book.
overall collection."
It's not your book. It's the idea that there's nothing wrong with your book. There's nothing wrong with the art. It's just that it jeopardizes the other side of the business.
Hmm.
And so,
And
and this is where I'm going to is that even with, I would imagine, a comic shop, I don't know if you've ever tried to approach comic shops or even retail packages, but what has that been like? Because I would imagine that some comic shops don't give a damn, but I would imagine that also some do. And they're like, look, I am an adult shop, I'm a kid friendly shop, and I don't carry a nude cover from Zenoscope. And I don't want to carry this, even though there's nothing wrong with this. It is decriminalized, but I don't want 7-year-old Johnny walking with mommy And then mom is freaked out that there's a weed book on the shelf because she's not coming back with Johnny. And I don't know like how you deal with that or even what that's been like, if that's come up, because from a publishing side, I understand it, but how has that been on the comic shop side? Because I think that's something that creators actually need to be aware of, that depending on what's in your book or what you have on your covers, it can be affecting where you can even sell it.
That's a really great point. Something I wish we knew 10 years ago when we were getting into this. Andrew, where were you then? Could have used your advice.
I was doing this 10 years ago, guys. I've been around forever. And nobody knows this, but I've been around for almost 10 years, and it's crazy. And but anyway, continue.
But yeah, like we've been fortunate. All the comic shops that we've had our books in have been really cool about it. There's a lot of really great shops here in Philly that have supported us. So really awesome there. But I definitely see that. We get that at the Comic Con. Sometimes like somebody's walking by and they see it and then they like kind of like frown, or you can tell it's like by their body language they're not interested. And if it's not a book for you, it's not a book for you. I do hope that people will check it out because like we were saying earlier, it is genuinely a funny book. There is a lot of serious storytelling. And I kind of get like, if your personal view does it, you don't like marijuana, that's cool. And I also get like not liking a lot of that stuff because stoner stuff tends to not be funny. So I would think I would come to it with that same kind of I don't know, like hesitancy to getting into it because a lot of the other stuff isn't as good. But I think this can go above a lot of that kind of stuff with the style of humor or the storytelling in general. But yeah, sometimes it also really connects with somebody from like, you can see them walking down the aisle in the con, and they see it and they're like, wait, they can put two and two together, and you're like, okay, that's going to be our customer right there. They're already excited, and they didn't even walk up to hear the pitch yet.
I think that's actually part of what's so rewarding about when somebody comes back and they read the comic and they go, wow, it was so much better than I even expected based on the cover or the premise, or it was so much funnier than I thought. I think maybe offhand you might see the cover or the title and assume that it's like just a giant stoner joke, like for 22 pages, but there's really nothing about the comic that is like pro marijuana consumption, despite the premise. Just like there's nothing about Spider-Man that's like pushing a pro spider agenda. It's just part of the premise. It's like, it's not, the story is still about other characters, and it's about human beings ultimately.
No. I mean, I get it, but again, it's the idea that if you have a book called Super Buds, obviously there's going to be people that are like, oh, that's a brilliant idea, and then there's people who are not, and then it just raises issues because I'll be very honest. I mean, I run and I'm getting into retail, and I don't know if I am going to pick up a retail package if you would offer it, and the only reason why is that I don't know eBay's rules on this. I don't know how it's going to jeopardize, my eBay store. There's a reason why I don't carry Z-rated covers from Zenoscope, which are nude covers, because I don't know how that is going to get flagged on eBay, because I've heard stories from people who have had their eBay accounts suspended for a week because they mislabeled it. And then I've heard people who have never had a problem. And so it becomes a real issue in my world where I'm like, okay, is this thing going to get flagged? And so that's my whole thing. That's just how I think as a retailer. And somebody who sells a lot on eBay and stuff, it's always a concern.
Yeah, that's a really great point. When you were talking about retailers, I was always thinking like brick and mortar store that you walk into, but I didn't think about like something like eBay and what are their regulations and things like that. We've been lucky with Kickstarter. Kickstarter's cool with it. There are a lot of other like weed related comics on Kickstarter. Some of them have done really well and some of them are really good. But yeah, I don't know. I would have to, maybe we can test it out. We'll put something on eBay and see if it gets flagged or not.
Because and even in a comic shop, I mean, it's the idea that I never ever, if I create a comic, want to invite a reason for a comic shop to get nailed. And I don't think that, I think it's a hard argument because I'm a free speech guy, but even still, even the potential, it just creates a whole big problem. And that's one of the things. But it is interesting though, because the other side of where you could sell, and I think you've been trying to do it from, if I remember correctly, is get into, vape shops and other places like that, and other areas that I guess are weed-friendly areas, for lack of a better word. And so what has that been like? Because let's be realistic here. If somebody is smoking, they are a very warm customer per se.
Yeah.
I don't mean warm as in like obviously they're inhaling something hot into their lungs. I mean like a very, susceptible customer. I want to make that crystal clear for everybody watching.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Open for sure. I mean, sometimes we can tell when people come up to the table that they're feeling particularly warm at that time. Um, Mostly, so we don't sell anything through dispensaries. I don't even know if like legally we could,
Yeah.
but we do promotional stuff sometimes, like just leave postcards that maybe have like a free issue code or something like that. Um, it's kind of like if you're a dispensary or a vape shop, you probably already have gone through so many legal hoops. We're not looking to make it any more complicated for you. But I was out in California over the summer and stopped by a dispensary and just promoted the comic. And they're like, "This is great. We'd be happy to help promote it." But by no means would we ever like sell, I don't think.
Yeah, I know in Pennsylvania it's controlled by like the state, so there are like very strict rules with what they can and can't sell. So they can't sell comics in dispensaries here. But like you're talking about like an old school head shop, that's definitely an area where might be able to promote it, see if they'd be interested. It's
There's
something
a
that's like a new
lot of
demographic.
stuff that sells things, and a lot of weird shops.
Yeah, we were
So
trying for years to get into Spencer's Gifts. So if anybody from Spencer's Gifts watches this YouTube,
that's a dirty word. That's a dirty word. I don't know
hit us up.
how much you know about what happened with Spencer's in comics in the last 2 years, but
No, I don't know anything.
there was a big thing that was like a $27,000 expenditure with 9 creators. That was like a scam, and they printed like
Wow.
2,000 books. It's a big issue. It's a big story. I mean, it's been well documented. It's complicated, and there are no winners and there are no losers. It is a disaster.
Wow.
I want to look into
I
that.
didn't hear. That's awful. Yeah,
It,
definitely
it
have to
was
check
in
it out.
indies too. I mean, it's bad. I mean, if you just type in Spencer's comic indie, it'll come up.
Okay, I'll
But
check that out.
it's a super complicated issue. Everybody in comics who knows, and it's not that hard to find. But to even go further into this, and obviously, I do want to talk about comics beyond just your book a little bit. Um, and obviously, I'm going to recommend, if you like, superhero stories and all that fun stuff, or if you like weed or you like something different, check out the book at the very least. There's a link in the description up above, down below, or to the side. I forget exactly where it is, but if you like that. But I do want to talk about the business of comics. As I said, we were going to table it. But you have been doing this for a while in indie comics and sitcom writing and pitching and all that stuff and web series development. So I am curious how you feel the business has changed in comics, because a lot has happened in the last 20 years in comics. A lot has happened in the last 3, more so than anything else. I think the most change in comics has happened in the last 3. I think some changes are good and some changes are bad. And so, how do you guys feel that the industry has changed, and even where do you think it's going? Because I think it is a very, very interesting time we're living in, and even
Yeah,
how
I
it's evolved.
I think time will tell. Right now, it's so chaotic in a way that it's hard to know where things are going to land. I think it's really awesome that there is growth in crowdfunding platforms that we've seen over the last few years. Really gives the average person an opportunity to become a comic creator, where there were gatekeepers before and you had to break in by submitting to a publisher and hoping that publisher will get out there. Now anybody can make a comic and get it onto Kickstarter. As long as you meet the basic criteria, you can get it out there. And then it's like true democracy. If people like it, they will spend their money on it, and then it's just up to you to fulfill it and make sure that you can live up to what you've promised. So that's really exciting. So I love the fact that creators from all over the world can get involved with that. There's really like no gatekeeping in that sense any longer. Anybody can make a comic. But at the same time, we've seen a lot of issues with the distribution side, with going on with Diamond, and then just like struggles with COVID that was happening. There's a lot of changes. People are leaving Diamond, like Marvel left Diamond. I was just reading Dark Horse, I think, was leaving Diamond. Just announced that. So there's a lot of chaos there, and then Like there's been the rise of Substack, which is I think also came out of like COVID, and creators were looking for new avenues, and that's really awesome. You can see a lot of like the big top writers and artists are flocking there, and they've been able to eliminate like the third person involved. They can get directly to their customer and communicate with them directly, ask them what they want, and deliver that. So I think that's really exciting. But it'll be interesting to see where it goes in the next 3 years, to see where that is, or the next 10 years even. What do you think, Mike? I don't know.
I agree. I mean, honestly, I feel like over the last couple years, you've been the one who's filling me in on a lot of this kind of stuff that's been going on with the industry. I feel like 10 years ago, I was constantly up to date on this, and I was reading every title I could get my hands on, and we were always talking about, the big five versus, the smaller indie labels, and it's just so different now. I mean, we haven't been to Comic-Con since before COVID, and that used to be such like a huge thing just to even be like, oh, we're gonna do promotions here. We're gonna, do man on the street interviews to promote the comic. And so many of our creator friends, like that's one of their biggest ways of making income to support their work. So not being able to do that for 2 years straight was huge for a lot of people. I
Yeah.
agree. The crowdfunding is definitely, seems like that is going to be something that is here to stay. I don't know if it's going to continue to be the avenue that all the big creators go for, but I appreciate that you get to see someone like Scott Snyder, who can work pretty much anywhere he wants, still doing, an indie crowdfunded comic book for ones that he wants to, pursue on his own terms, and not really have to necessarily go the route of working with DC or Marvel.
Yeah, and it's ownership too, right? Like these guys are
Yeah.
creating characters, and they're seeing them. If they're working for Marvel or DC and Warner Brothers and Disney, they're seeing their properties going off there, and they want a chunk of that. So
See, it's interesting, and I'm actually curious how you guys feel about this, because I believe that I've said this before, that the three things that are dictating media right now is on demand, which is I could get it anytime I want it, customization, um, and then I think big libraries. I think those are the three things that are dictating media. I think we're seeing it with Peacock, we're seeing it with Warner Brothers Discovery, we're seeing it with Disney, we're seeing it with a lot of other things right now. And I think with comics, we're starting to see it as well. And I think that those are the three big things that are dictating. And I'm curious how you guys feel about that. And then even going further, I'm curious if you think that, the big guys are just letting these people play right now, but they're eventually going to not crush them, but politely encourage them to come back home.
yeah, well, they definitely have a plan that I'm sure they're all sitting around a boardroom right now coming up with, probably several plans. But it'll be interesting to see what that is. But I think you're right. Like the subscription based model is going to be the way of the future. And it's interesting. I don't think Comixology is as popular as any of the other ones that are out there streaming for like other media. That's probably the biggest name, but I don't think a lot of users like it. So it's going to be interesting how they have to adapt it to catch their audience. I think people also like to have physical comic books, which is different than streaming. Like we've all adapted to not having CDs or not having a DVD or a Blu-ray. Like we can stream those things, but there's something about a comic that people do like the tangible nature of it. I think out of convenience, a digital comic is great, but I don't think it's quite the same as a physical copy that you can read.
So
I've had a lot of
let me ask you a question about that, and then you obviously, Mike, you could answer whatever you want to answer. But do you also think though that, because I love Comixology, I love it because it's cheap. It's $6.37 a month,
Yeah.
and when I'm reading 50 issues a month, I can't beat that price point. And also, I don't want to own those 50 issues or those 50 graphic novels, and I read a lot of comics every month. And so for me, I think that everybody's viewing Comixology wrong. I think people are viewing Comixology as a reading experience and trying to compare it to indie comics. I view it as a library access point of things that I want to read, but I don't want to buy. And I think once you change your perspective on comicsology, you're like, oh man, if I read even 10 graphic novels, it's the lowest price point, but I don't want to own this. I just want to read it, and I don't want to go to the library. That's how I view comicsology. I view comicsology as the library, just on my iPad. But
that's a really great point. I something I didn't think about that you brought up too is I think there's something about like millennials and everybody else now even adapting. There's like a very minimalist attitude. Like people don't want to have a lot of clutter, right? So I think people like that they don't have to have their giant DVD collection that they can stream on any of these platforms. So that's a really good point too. All these physical things do take up space, and people don't like that. They want a very minimalist thing right now.
Not even that. It's that I read a bunch of Zenescope stuff. I don't want to buy every Zenescope book they have. It's not for me. If I read Black Sable, I want to go to Barnes & Noble, pick up Black Sable, download it on my iPad, then go to Barnes & Noble, read it while I'm in Barnes & Noble, then pick up another book, and then, that's what it is. But guess what? Finding Black Sable sucks. Like, you have to legitly order it off of eBay or get it off of Amazon because you can't get it in a bookstore. Most books that are actually in comicsology, you can't get in your Barnes & Noble. So it's like tracking down these physical items, but I'll back somebody's Kickstarter at the same time. It's not
right
one or the other, it's both. And I think I think the people are whining on comicsology. I think that they're whining, but I think they're the people who are still buying it. It's the same people with Netflix. They're still watching Netflix, but they're bitching about it.
Yeah.
No, I see your point, and I agree. Like, there are definitely streaming services I subscribe to because I'm like, I want access to this library, and it's not, it's not about the price point necessarily, or it's about like the amount of content I'm taking in. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's worth it for me to pay this much a month because I'm gonna watch this many shows on HBO, like, back when Game of Thrones is on, or Stranger Things on Netflix, or whatever. You just know you're gonna watch enough to justify the price point.
I'll ask you a question. In 1993, how much was cable? Do you know?
I have no
Don't
idea.
know. I wasn't paying a cable bill at that point.
Cable was $37 in 1993. Netflix is going to be $20 sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
If we put the cable bill in modern 2022 times, people would, and we inflated that number, they would be paying more for cable than for Netflix every single month. And people are still complaining, yet Netflix has better shit than cable. And so Netflix is cheaper than what people were paying. And if we were to keep it at the same price point, and yet people are still whining, and yet Netflix has a huge library. Peacock is $5.
That's true. All of that is true. But those are ultimately like saying, HBO on cable was only an extra 10 or 15. You're still paying that base price of internet, which is for a lot of people ridiculous these days. If you could, unless you're watching Netflix just on your phone and it's like, oh, this is just part of my my additional data or something like that.
But I like talking about the industry because I think it's so interesting.
For sure.
I come from a different angle where I haven't produced a comic, but I'm in media. I've been doing this for 10 years and I've seen everything. And I realize that this right here, people think this is a dinosaur, but I think interviews like this are actually the future. I don't think interviews at cons are the future. I don't. I actually think that big libraries are the future. I'm a big proponent that, I had a sponsor a while back and now I don't. But the way I view it is that in the next 10 years, if I stick around, I don't know if I'm coming back for season 4 yet, or I might come back for maybe in March for season 4 just to take some time off. But I believe that when I have 1,500, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 interviews, it's going to get to a point where it's like, oh, okay, now I have a big enough library that I can license my content out.
I love that. It lives forever.
Real play. It's called Joe Rogan, guys. It's called Joe Rogan. That's what Spotify.
Yeah.
They bought a license to Rogan.
I was going to bring up the Spotify model too, because there's so many podcasts that I listened to before they went to Spotify, and part of it was just their back catalog, the being able to go back. Like maybe somebody shows me one episode or tells me about one episode or plays it for me. But then when I see, oh, they interviewed this person, oh, they talked about this subject, oh, they covered this thing that I like, and then I share it with my friends, and then now you can see exactly what you're saying. Like Spotify's buying up all of the, or like bringing all of those podcasts under their umbrella because they want the library. They want people to be able to come to Spotify and get all those podcasts in one place.
And
What a world we live in where all this stuff is accessible like that too, like at your fingertips. Like, I mean, as a kid, I never would have dreamed of that. But I mean, anytime you can just type in to your computer and find an interview from 20 years ago with a creator, you can see them being interviewed last week. To have all that like so accessible is really awesome. Especially like if you're into comics, there's so many really great interviews that you can access that way.
Yeah, I know that's why it's so hard for
Yeah.
anybody who's doing this type of thing to get any money. It's so hard. But I mean, even going off of this about the industry, I mean, one of my biggest concerns is that we're coming to a very cold death in media collectively, because all this stuff is popping up now. And I don't know about you guys, but I mean, right now I'm employed for the first time in a while, and I have income coming in. But even with that, I only have so much money I could spend on comics, and there's a lot of great products, and I'm very curious. And it's not just comics. I mean, you're competing against Peacock. You're competing against this show
Yeah.
technically for space and time and money per se, and everything is competing against everything. I mean, I compete against the NFL, both in time and a bunch of other stuff. I'm not saying I'm taking on the NFL right now, but I think my point is that, you know, what is that like for you guys, and how do you guys feel about that? Because when there is so much content out there, how do you stand out? I think it's one of the biggest problems in comics beyond cash flow.
Oh, absolutely. And I agree. It's like there's only a finite amount of time that you can spend absorbing content. I remember like it being a real like just aha moment back when Tim and I were in college and YouTube was, growing and growing, and all of a sudden they had broke the threshold of that there was more content being uploaded to YouTube than it was possible to watch in one day. And like that change of like you can't absorb everything. It's impossible at this point. So now you are being forced to choose what's the content you want to take in. And that's just on YouTube. Like you said, there's thousands and thousands of other channels and forms of medium that are different art mediums that you can go into, or not even just art. People who watch news all day, it's all the same kind of thing. Like, how do you want to spend your time? I think when you come to marketing stuff like that, you have to try to be creative. We've definitely tried to use creative ways to market Superbud or to market our other things that we pitch. It doesn't always pan out. Sometimes you have to pivot in the middle when you realize something isn't working. And like, really, if I was going to say there's a strategy, that's the biggest one, is just to be able to adapt in real time and not be like rigid about the way you want to go about it.
I think like the one thing that we have and other indie creators versus like a big giant conglomerate is that personal connection and that personal touch. So like connecting with your audience and making sure that they understand that like this is a passion project. We're not getting paid from doing this. This is something we do for fun. And then bringing that passion to them and letting them know that like, this is why. Right. And when they see that you are really invested in the story emotionally, or that you're just putting all this time and energy in it, they want to see it succeed, and they will help you. They'll get the word out for you and help promote it. And then they just make like a really great audience too. They're really receptive to it. So how do you do that on like a digital thing is the big challenge for us, especially since we haven't been in cons, because it is easier to make that personal connection when you're face to face with somebody at a convention versus like through Kickstarter. That's why even though a lot of people have shied away from putting the video part into their Kickstarter pitch, Mike and I have continued to add videos in because we want to make sure that they know the creators that are making this too. It's not just the face of here's the Superbud comic, but here's the face of the creators as well.
I also think that, and this is just my experience, is that, and I think it's a big problem with foresight, is a lot of people in comics I don't think understand the value of interviews. And I don't think they understand the value of, you do an interview and then that interview is out in the web space. And even if it's only gets, 100 plays in its first, showing, all of a sudden it does drive traffic. And I think that a lot of people, in my opinion, rely too much on cons. And I think that, media is a big thing. And I think that people value certain aspects of comics way beyond, you know, like I think people value a cover for a comic book more than they value an interview. And I think it's actually a real problem right now because media is complicated and also cheap media is complicated. And I mean, I'm biased because I'm an interview show, but at the same time, I also see that I do a bunch of interviews on other stuff, and I understand what an interview does because I have business that gets referred to my eBay business from interviews that I did 5-6 years ago, and that refers me maybe $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a year, and that was 4 years ago. So it's still referring me money, and I think that that's something that people also forget, that a personal connection also doesn't have to be at a con. This is a personal connection, and it's a very audience-driven concept, I think. And I think that's a big problem right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the idea of a long form interview where you can really get into the niche of these kind of things and you're asking really engaging questions and we can kind of bounce back and forth and the conversation can just kind of drive itself. That's really exciting that you don't get that in a little sound bite or in a little like 2 sentence preview about your comic.
You don't even get it in a, I guess, a press room at a con.
Yeah.
You really don't, and it's a problem. An hour-long interview, 2-hour-long interviews. People actually watch this stuff. I just had an interview that did almost 1,600 plays. 32 minutes of it on
Awesome.
average has been watched. The average viewer has a 32-minute span.
That's
So
awesome.
that's the idea that whoever's book that is, it's my friend Sam Carter's book, Final Boy. They want to know what this story is, and
Yeah.
they're either going to be convinced or not convinced to buy it. They're going to be swayed one way or the other. Now, that's up to them, that's up to him, that's up to me, and that's up to everybody. But I think that's something that people don't understand is that for the next, I guess, however long is up there, I mean, it's probably going to be up there for another 10 years minimum, that is now a gigantic ad. And I think a lot of people in comics don't have the foresight to understand that spending an hour and a half doing an interview can pay off dividends for 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And to your point, like you get somebody to come back 10 years later and they find that thing and then they're still interested 10 years later and you've got that product ready for them. That's great. And all the people in between watching that for that many years.
Yeah. It's super, super complicated. I don't think it's complicated. I just think that a lot of people in comics don't have foresight. I think that
Short-sighted.
and I think unfortunately people in comics are managing so much shit that they don't handle the business stuff. Like I haven't written a comic, I run an eBay business. I obviously have a day job, I run another business, and I think that's something that people have to really figure out in comics. And I know because my Kickstarter destroyed me.
It takes a lot out of you
takes a
too.
toll.
Oh, no. It destroyed me because people were not receptive to my idea. And that's what it was. And I funded, but a lot of people talk shit about me, but they're all wrong. This is the future. I mean, I basically was asking money to be a guest on my show because I don't have a problem getting guests. And I needed a differentiating factor. And unfortunately, the way I see it, and I got no problem saying this, is that if you pay for a table at a con and you're selling your merch, you know what? You should be paying me too because you're being on a show that's an advertisement for you.
Yeah, or how many people are paying for
It's not a complicated concept. You are legitimately getting an hour to sell your book or your product or you, and it's infinite. It doesn't whine, it doesn't complain, it doesn't bitch, and it goes up there forever, and you can use it however you want. And you're already paying to play, and it's just you don't want to pay to play for this. That's what it comes down to. That's really what it comes down to, is that people in comics feel like they're paying to play so much that I'm the last person at the litter, but I might be the most effective. And look, if it's not my show, you should be paying for. You should be paying for somebody else's. If you don't think
And a lot of people do.
What were we saying?
I said, and a lot of people do. There is like a lot of money that is thrown around in terms of that kind of marketing, or like, oh, push me in this direction on this person's show. That's always going to be that financial component is always going to be a big part of marketing.
There are two ways. You either earn your way in or you pay your way in. And that's what it comes down to. And so at the end of the day, if you don't find value in my show, that's fine. But you don't then get to come on my show because my show is exclusive. And that's my point, is that you are paying to play. It's just, what do you want to pay to play in? Because if you want to sell your books at a con, you got to do that. If you want to be on somebody's show that has the viewership or you think is valuable, that's where it's going. I think that's one of the biggest things that I think a lot of creators don't understand, is that, and it's also the idea is that if I'm asking $10 for you to be on my show, that's nothing. And in reality, if I'm going to be getting 500 views across 6 platforms to a hot audience. So, but again, that's just an example, but that's just me bitching.
But that's a great point. Like, and it comes back to our conversation with how expensive indie comics can be. A lot of times people are so focused on that page rate for your cover artist or your interior artist. They're not thinking about the other things that are as valuable or more valuable. Like Mike and I were talking about, like investing in an editor. Like if you're making comics the way that we did Superbud, which is like DIY, we're doing it ourselves, it's self-published. Invest that money, a little bit of money, into an editor. That's going to pay you back dividends, or marketing. So they're so strapped with cash. A lot of these creators are all putting it into that interior, and they're not paying for these other things that are going to be way more valuable.
I'll throw you another thing that a lot of indie creators should invest in: ads in somebody's book.
Yeah.
Ads on podcasts. You know what is? Better yet, send a free copy to a bunch of comic shops.
Mm-hmm.
All this stuff, or better yet, what is? Figure out how to put up posters and then just staple them on a telephone pole. It sounds stupid, it sounds crazy, but you know what is? It works. It works. Mm-hmm. I'll throw you something even crazier. What if somebody did a billboard on the New Jersey Turnpike?
We've talked about this before. Yeah. It's interesting to know. I don't know. I'd like to see.
That's part of why we at a lot of the promotional stuff we do is giving away the first issue for free, because if somebody sees our comic or sees the main cover for the first issue, and then they're like, okay, I would maybe read that, but maybe I don't want to spend money. If they read the first issue, we have confidence that they'll come back.
I'll give you a crazier. I know somebody. I don't know if you know who Preston Poulter is.
No.
Preston printed, I think, 3,000 or 4,000 copies of a book. He printed them at like 68 cents a pop, and he just gives them away for free of his first issue. Yeah. Think about it, right? You're at a con, and you printed for $2,200 like 5,000 issues, and you just hand it out, but you have a huge library. You're gonna get people to return to you. You're gonna get people, but you put all your information on the back. Guess what? People throw out a business card. They don't throw out a comic book.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And so if you can afford it, or you can service the debt, it's a no-brainer. And especially once you have a library. So you have 10 issues of your book and you have enough stock to sell, and you reprint your first issue into an ash can and it costs you $2,200, you got 5,000 of them. I would just start handing them out for free at cons.
That's something we've done also when we were pitching some of our other titles. Is we would have an 8-page ash can version, and we were just like, let's just give this to people because we want to get this out there. And we've had people years later who come back and like, oh, that ash can you gave me at such and such con, like I loved that, like that was great. What are you doing with it now?
Yeah, and this is the whole thing where I just think a lot of creators do not think beyond. And I think that creators don't know how to take care of people that can help them in the long run. I mean, I could tell you that, I'll be very honest with everybody, if you really want to get in a good position with a podcaster or somebody who's interviewing you and you don't want to pay them, send them a copy of your book. Chances are, if you send them a copy of your book, they're going to hit you up whenever you need. I'm doing it with Dan Schmidt right now, who did the Things That Crawled. He sent me a copy of his book. and he didn't pay me, but like I push his book all the time. And I said to him, anytime you need an interview, you hit me up because I'm going to kick somebody else out of that spot if you want that spot. It's not that hard. And I think that people in this community, they network and they network with each other. But I don't think comic people network with podcasters or shows or comic shops well, or even, promoters and even people outside of comics. I don't think they network with them well. I think it's a real deficit. And it's even just saying hi to somebody.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I'm speculating here, but I think especially in comics, there is a tendency to be a little bit less social. A lot of creators that I've met and that I've talked to and that I have good relationships with will share that they have like tremendous social anxiety, and I think again, like I'm going, it's anecdotal based on my experiences, but it seems like a lot of people have trouble like feeling comfortable talking to podcasters or networking in any way, even with other creators. And sometimes it's like, Tim and I have had the experience where we're like, okay, we're going to put our best foot forward here. We're going to talk to this person who is either just our neighbor and we want to be friendly, or this person who, maybe we look up to. And we almost always have really positive experiences. Like a lot of people are very friendly, but it doesn't seem like necessarily that's the rule of thumb if you're a
It's
comic book
not.
creator.
It's not. I mean, just on my end, I'm very, very open about
Yeah.
this, is that I think what happens is that I think people in the comic community, I think they network with each other. I also think that, they look at, how does this benefit me? And I think that when they look at a podcast, like, I'm on the show, that should be good enough. And I'm like, but it's really not.
Yeah.
It's really not. If I'm putting in work and you're running a $50,000 campaign, there gets to a point where you got to share the wealth. And I just think that that there are problems, and also, what it is? It's not even money. It's a thank you too. Sometimes it's just a thank you. Sometimes it's like, hey, let me send you the digitals, and money's a part of it because, as I stated at the start of this, and I'm a big proponent of it. Without money, nothing gets done. Because I'm not making a living doing this. I don't think you guys are making a living doing your comic yet either. And I
No,
can't stress
definitely
that
not.
enough. That all the money goes into covering costs. And I think that's something that people have to understand. But I digress. I'm going to get us canceled. I could rant about my whole
Coming
thing.
for us.
I could rant about my whole freaking podcast Kickstarter experience. And I think you said it well, where a lot of Kickstarters are passion projects that have the potential to make real money. But again, every project is a passion project. I feel on Kickstarter, 90% of them are passion projects and they don't make money. I think it's fair to say that projects break even, but most don't make money on Kickstarter. I would bargain. And even when they go into something like Scout or Second Sight Publishing or Black Caravan, I don't think the money is huge either.
No, I think you're right. Yeah, unless you get like one of those rare monster hits, but they're few and far between.
So to even talk about that, I mean, how do you guys feel about the entire, indie publishing world outside of Kickstarter at this point, where they pick up books like Scout, Black Caravan, Second Sight Publishing? There's a few others that I can't think of. But how do you guys feel about that? Because I know that's tricky right now.
So I mean, as a fan, I love reading a lot of those books. I'm excited that there is that market, so we're not just stuck reading like the big two superheroes. So I'm always interested in checking them out. Mike and I kind of going back and forth. We were pitching Superbud to other publishers originally, and the few deals that were presented to us or people were interested, it never seemed like it made sense for us at the level that we were doing Superbud. That if they were going to pick it up, that their ability to raise the pure units number wasn't enough for us to offset the amount of money that we'd be giving up or the ownership that we'd give up. Superbud was one of those projects where Mike and I were like, okay, we want to own it 100%. Anything else after that, maybe we could discuss selling another comic that we come up with. But for this project, we wanted to own it. So we weren't willing to give
So
that up.
let me ask a question, because I don't know anything about this beyond just the fact that anytime you go through a publisher, there's money, but also there are bigger problems with books as well. In my view, and correct me if I'm wrong, and feel free to disagree. You might have to give up certain rights. Obviously, that company wants to make money, so if you're doing X on Kickstarter, and they might let you do your Kickstarter and keep the Kickstarter, but you can't go and produce your own variant. You can't produce a certain amount of books afterwards. You might be able to do 1,500 books, but then that's it for that issue.
Yeah.
That's for your own collection or to sell at cons. And then also, my feel on it is that there's certain books that I don't think should have ever gotten a deal. The fact that they got a deal, and I don't know how they're doing in a comic shop, but I don't want to be writing a book that's a shitty book, and then in issue 3 and 4 and 5, the comic shop can't get rid of those books, because that doesn't help me as a writer. And
Great point.
let's be realistic. I mean, issues 3, 4, and 5 are rough issues to
Yeah.
sell. So, I mean, I don't know how you guys feel about that, but I feel like it's a double-edged sword.
Definitely. And I think every comic's different. I think Mike and I are talking about with another comic, going to another publisher and seeing if that's a good opportunity for us then. But for Superblood, it was something that we just wanted to be able to do on our own. We could have total control. So we could bring it to Kickstarter, bring it to our audience directly that way. And then the other thing that we didn't talk about is with being the owner is like we have all of the licensing rights. So if we ever want to see an option for another a form of medium, if there's TV rights or movies or something like that, like for adaptations, we always own the rights to that. So that's something else that I think creators have to think about too, is
let
like,
me ask
what
you a
happens in
question
20
about
years?
that. Yeah, let me ask you a question about that too, because I think you mentioned TV rights and TV rights, movie rights, potentially, I guess, novelization. I think one of the biggest things that people don't realize is toys and T-shirts, and there's a whole concept where if you own the right to something, right? So we'll use a video game as an example. What would it have been like if I trademarked the name Rock Band for electronic video games, right? Or if I trademarked the name Guitar Hero before Guitar Hero became big, and I had an indie comic called Guitar Hero, right? And I owned that, and I technically trademarked it for everything, including electronics. I think a lot of people don't realize that. I think TV, in my opinion, and movies are actually not where the money is with certain comics. I think actually, depending on your name, the name itself can be worth a way more money than anything else. The name Super Buds can be a big deal, and some weed company could want to pay you like $3 million to license that name.
That's a good point. Yeah. And back to the toys too, like Todd McFarlane, look how much money he's made off of McFarlane toys, right? I know there's a new movie coming out, and they made the movie in the 90s, but it's really like the toys that have made his money for him.
I mean, George Lucas, Star Wars, he said, you guys can keep this.
That was the first one.
Take the toys.
Yeah.
That was the first real big like toy adaptation from a movie that made a ton of money.
Made him a lot of money.
Yeah.
Freaking, it makes Disney a lot of money right now too.
Still going.
Think about the cards, Star Wars cards with tops. That's a big deal. I mean, and so I think this is also the other things where creators don't understand that just on a T-shirt level. I mean, I own certain T-shirt rights, and I've only sold like 2 or 3 of them. But the shirt itself, I mean, that has to be worth something. And all of a sudden, gets in front of the right person, and then I now own that thing, and maybe somebody wants to pick up that T-shirt, and they want to buy it right off of me. So that's something that I think creators don't understand either, is that the value might not be so much in television. It might be in what the whole IP is.
Yeah. Yeah. And owning
this
that
is right
IP.
out of sorry, I was gonna say this is right out of She-Hulk. The latest episode was all about trademark and like licensing.
I don't own Disney. I don't own Disney Plus. I don't have time. I don't have time between wrestling, Peacock, Crunchyroll, and Netflix. I mean, my content schedule is full. It's full. I love Disney. I own Disney as a shareholder. Disney's a great company. I got no problem with what they're doing. I just don't have time to watch it, so I'm not gonna go spend money to
I
go
feel like
do.
that's where we're
Yeah.
all at nowadays. Like, there's so much really great content out there. There's not enough time in the day for us to even check it out. You know,
I mean, look at Resident Evil on Netflix. That show was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
I'm
was
a
bad.
binger, so
It was
I
bad. It
end up.
was horrible. It was horrible.
Oh, I didn't see it, but
It
I
was a
heard a lot of
dumpster
people
fire.
saying it was. I heard so many people saying that it was very bingeable, and like that's if you're gonna put a bingeable show on somewhere, it's Netflix. But
It was brilliant. I mean, it was a great like 8 hours. Just you sit down, watch, you get a few beers, and you just chill out. And
mhm.
oh, this is awesome.
That's literally what my friend told me too. She was like, it's batshit, but it's entertaining. I'm enjoying it.
I think they should have done a season 2. I think everybody was like, "This is horrible," and I'm like, "No, no, no, guys. I don't think you got what this show is. This is you come home from work on a Friday, your girlfriend's out of town, you have a 6-pack, and boy, do you have a fun weekend." That's what that's what that whole thing was. It was like Cowboy Bebop. That was exactly what Cowboy Bebop
Yeah.
was. And it was epic. But I digress. This show just completely went off the train. The first we were up
We
here.
were productive, and then we had some fun with it too.
We were up here, and then we just went right down here, and it's all right.
Sometimes you got to get the
That's
big
all right.
picture
We're
of what's
pulling
going
up.
on. Yeah.
I think I had a blast. I mean, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah, me
it was
too.
Great. And then now that I got myself canceled, people probably are gonna watch this and hate me because, but that's
Hate,
okay.
Heat mail's coming in.
I don't take it personal. It's all right. If they fail to take me out in January, I become indestructible as long as but I do want to get back to your book. I know you had another book coming. I think it's Grave Brigade Gate. That I can't speak today.
There you go.
Yes, it's Grave
Brigade.
Brigade. Yes, I've given up today. That G is just tripping me out.
Yeah.
But I know that's coming, and I think that's in the works. And is that going to be the next book that you're doing? And is it going to be kickstarted, or is it still just being babied, for lack of a
Yes.
better word?
So issue 1 is being drawn right now. Looking at the timeline, it's probably going to be ready to be released first. So we'll probably launch that, and then sometime after that, we'll do Superbud issue 4. But yeah, a big change of pace for us. It is a total action comic. It's black and white pulp comic about a group of World War II soldiers that are fighting monsters. They're monster hunters. So it's part of like a secret organization. Their job is to hunt all these monsters. So there's a lot of like old school horror comic influence. There's like the classic action with the team of rebel fighters. There's a little bit of like a mystery involved with trying to figure out what's going on. There's a little bit of the pulpy thing with like Indiana Jones. A lot of fun. It's just total like action comic.
Yeah, and then obviously you got Superbuds as well, and I know that people can get at least issue 3, if not issues 1 and 2. I think I put up the link to your store or one of
Awesome.
the places
Thank
where
you.
they can get it. So
Yes.
you like what you heard here, or you're just like, oh man, this is cool. It's a book about weed. You go pick that book up as well. And then obviously, where can people go and bother everybody? And bother you two in particular. People can bother me anywhere they want to bother me, but where can people bother you two?
So you could find us on social media at Superbud Comic, and then I am on Instagram at TimRadWrites, and Mike can pitch his own.
Yeah, I'm all things _ Mike Dean, and yeah, we're also on Twitter, so find us there.
You can tell we don't update that one very often.
Yeah, exactly.
We're also on, I guess, Twitter. And then our website has free issue 1. So if you go to superbudcomic.com, you can get issue 1 for free. And as Andrew mentioned, we have issues 1 and 2 on Comixology. Now that all of our backers have issue 3, we're going to put issue 3 on Comixology soon, pending any craziness from Comixology, but should be on there soon.
Yeah, no, and I'm just going to keep saying it. You have to support indie comics. What that means is whenever there's a Kickstarter or it's in a comic shop or it's on Comixology, or it's on a website, you gotta go and buy those issues because they do go to directly supporting the making of more issues. And that is extremely important because that's the way this gets done. So, there's no ifs, buts, or coconuts about that. You really, if you like something and you want to see more of it, you need to go out and buy it and support it and make sure that you tell everybody else that, hey, I read this cool book and you should go buy your own copy as well. Because that's how stuff gets made. Furthermore, you should follow people on social media. It's free. And again, that's also how stuff gets made, is supporting people. And then personally, my guests are probably going to disagree. They might be slightly biased about their book. I personally do not care what you support in comics, media, independent media, podcasts, wrestling companies. I don't care. If you only love wrestling, then that's what you should support if you want to see more of it. But if you don't support anything that you like and then it disappears, well, you can't come bitching to me that it's gone. And so if you don't want it to go away, go support it. And if enough people support something, more of it will be made. It's just the way it works. So can't, I guess, convey that enough. Furthermore, about me, obviously I kind of tip my hat. I am independent media, so I appreciate when people support me, when they buy me a coffee, when they check out my stuff, they actually subscribe to YouTube, all that fun stuff. Follow me on social media. It goes a long way. And if you find value in this show in any which way, support it is all I'm going to say. Or if you don't find value in this show, that's fine too. But go support something that you do find value in. I do have my comic book investing class coming October 5th-ish, depending on Friday if my Mac is healthy. But it might be delayed a week if that's the case. But beyond that, it is coming in October. So if you want to learn how to invest like a pro in comic books and learn the basics, my class is for you. It's about 18 to 22 hours, $40 on Udemy. So it'll be fun. It'll be a good one. If you don't want to learn how to do that, that's fine too. But that's all I got for everybody. And on that note, I'm going to give whoever wants the final word. It's yours.
Go ahead, Mike.
Tim.
Oh,
Yeah,
all right.
all right.
I guess I'll just say thanks, Andrew, for having us on, man. I really appreciate it. This is such a fun show to do. You ask really engaging questions and so awesome. So appreciate you having us on here and for what you do for everybody in the comic industry with so many awesome guests that have been on. I've gone through the list there. There's so many really cool books that you've highlighted. So really awesome of you to do that. So appreciate you doing that. And hope everybody else had fun. And yeah, that's it.
Well,
Yeah,
I don't think
thanks
I
so
could
much
have
for
said
great
that.
conversation.
What were you saying?
I was just saying, thanks for a great conversation. It's fun, even, it's always nice to just have like an hour or so to like talk comics with friends or just shoot the shit. So I had a lot of fun. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, no problem. And on that note, everybody, I don't think I could have said that any better myself. So that's a wrap.